I'm Bob Verdi, the Blackhawks historian. What we have witnessed in the last few years really is history. Owners of sports teams are not supposed to be popular. It just comes with the territory.
Well, remember, a horse can always throw a bad shoe.
Owners are rich, they're powerful, handsome, they make big decisions. If the team wins, it's the players. If the team loses, it's management. But in this city, in this room, there is an owner who is much beloved and respected. When Rocky Wirtz took over the Blackhawks in 2007, he could have said, "Give me time, be patient. I haven't been around the team. Let me look things over." He could have trotted out the old 5-year plan. Not Rocky. He figured it out in about 5 minutes. And the result is the most successful period in franchise annals. 3 Stanley Cups, perpetual sellouts, home games on TV.
What a novelty.
And a connection with the fans that is genuine and sincere. And now Rocky has a book about to come out, The Breakaway. It's aptly titled. The author, Brian Smith, much decorated senior writer for Chicago Magazine. This is not an autobiography, but as a writer, I appreciate how much work and how well you've done this, Brian. And also when Rocky, it feels like Rocky and it sounds like Rocky. It's excellent work. Forward was written by Tony Esposito. Thank you. The Blackhawks Hall of Fame ambassador, who has a unique perspective, having known the patriarch of the family, Arthur, and then his son, Bill, and of course now, Rocky. And rave reviews are coming in for this book. Rick Cogan of the Chicago Tribune last week said, "This is a terrific book, a dramatic family saga told in artful prose with emotional turmoil. There is enough hockey to satisfy any fan, but there is much more about business and power, love and loss, volcanic tempers and shrewd deals, and all the other elements that have conspired to create a vast and diversified fortune and make a damaged family." And Rocky, I know you are extremely busy. How did you find the time, and why? Doing a book is not easy, even if you're not writing it, even if you're just talking it.
Well, Bob, Brian had come to me. He wrote a piece in the Chicago Magazine in 2008, before the Hawks had really done anything. And then Brian kept, then 2010, then 13 and 15 came along, and Brian kept saying, "I want to do a book." And so I thought about, if we do a book, we really have never written anything about the family. And what's nice about what Brian did is he wrote about the Wirtz family, and it happens to own a hockey team instead of the other way around. And so I said to Brian, if we're going to sit down, and you're going to write this book with or without me, but if we agree to sit down and talk to you and spend the time, a couple things. The first thing is, I do not need to be patted on the back and said, "What a great guy you are." I said, you got to de-gush this thing. You got to make sure that you tell it the truth. And then, quite frankly, the Blackhawk Foundation is something very near and dear to our family. I said, if we're lucky enough to sell a couple books, all the proceeds have to go to the foundation. And with that, Brian said, "Okay, now I'll turn it over to Brian."
Thank you. I concur. Writing a book is not easy, and I'm grateful to be here today, and grateful, and honored to have been able to take on this project. And Rocky is right. When we first started talking about this, well, let me back up. I'm a journalist by trade. I'm not a sports writer. I've been a hard news reporter many years ago, and then a magazine writer for a good 20 years now. So I do tell in-depth stories, but it's about all kinds of things: sports, celebrity, profiles, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm a journalist coming at this, and it's important to me to make a book powerful and resonate with the readers, not to write a Valentine. I mean, I don't think readers, you guys want to see that. You want to know what really happened, and so I got a glimmer of Rocky's candor when I did the original magazine story. I mean, he really, even my editor would ask me, it's like, do you think he'd be willing to talk about some of the harder issues? And he sure did. And even as the book, progressed, it's funny that de-gush phrase became a thing. Again, I'm a journalist, so I'm trying to write it not gushy. And even then, Rocky went back in a couple of parts. It's like, de-gush this. This was John McDonough, or this was deflecting praise, basically. And Rocky was deeply honest in this, and that really has made, I think, for a terrific story far beyond sports. I mean, as you said, it'll satisfy any Blackhawks fans. There's a lot of history about the beginning of the Blackhawks, but the heart of it is the family empire and the rise of it and the struggles that came with that.
Well, also, my grandfather died in '83, and between Bob Verdi and Tony Sposito, there's not a lot of people around that knew my grandfather, and certainly Dad, and obviously myself. So it was nice to kind of go back and say, how do we get started? My great-grandfather came over. We're farmers up in Mundelein in Fremont Center. It wasn't that we had a silver spoon in our mouth and that we came from money. And we made it the old-fashioned way. We earned it. And I thought it was important to tell that story. And then Brian hired researchers to really do the research. But the nice thing about it for me, it puts all these stories that we had heard together in one piece. And so for future generations, it'd be great. I'm lucky to have my kids, the fourth generation in the business. But the fifth and sixth and so on, hopefully, will all be doing business, because usually by the third generation, most businesses, the first generation is the creator and the entrepreneur. The second one lives off of that, and the third one says, I've made enough money, now buy me out. So the nice thing about it is we're still here, we're still solvent, and we told the story. And I think Brian, and hopefully everyone will buy it, because quite frankly, I'm hawking the book for the foundation. But I think you're going to find it interesting, because there's enough intrigue in there, and there's enough dysfunction, that you have. Every family has dysfunction, and if anyone tells you there's not dysfunction in their family, I tell you they're lying. And so, of course, we're not like any other family. Of course, we have dysfunction. Of course, we have things. But in spite of that, we're still able to survive and to work together and to persevere. And I think that hopefully you'll see when you read the book that we're like everyone else. It just happened to be we're in the sports business, but we're in also other businesses too. And that helps us become a better businessman, not just relying on one thing.
I would say, yes, dysfunction. I use the word Shakespearean to describe. I mean, yeah, it's fraught and tough stories that, again, Rocky's candor really made this, but I think it was fascinating for me, as I'm doing it. So I hope it'll be interesting to pull the curtain back a little bit and for you guys to see kind of the dynamics going on.
Before we move on here, I want to, if you'd like to ask a question pertaining to this session, please visit the question booth along the wall to your left, over there, right? Fill out a form, and the last 15 minutes or so we'll do the questions.
If it's a tough question, Brian's going to answer them.
We'll screen him.
He stole my line. I was going to say I defer to Rocky. Everything. This goes south, I defer to Rocky.
Rocky mentioned this, Tony, that you're in the you when you came into the Blackhawks from Montreal, one of the great bargains of all time, on the waiver wire for $25,000. Now he's in the Hall of Fame. Arthur Wirtz. Arthur Wirtz was still, we were talking about it before, when he walked in gate 3.5 at the stadium, there was a presence about Arthur Wirtz that was difficult to describe. And of course, Tony, you worked for him.
Well, I knew Arthur Wirtz. I met him in '69 when I came here, and he had me come into his office. Is it on 666, was it?
Yeah, before you, now it's 680, but then it was 666 Lakeshore Drive.
And I walked in there and I looked at the sign, 666. I said, oh, I don't know. But I went upstairs, and the secretary brought me into his office. He has this big wood office, big desk, ornate. And he looked up. I walked in, and he stood up, and he was a giant of a man. He was 6'4" or 5", 300 pounds.
He admitted to 320, but it probably was a biscuit more.
Big guy, with big hands and big feet. I mean, he was a monster of a man, and he was, much to my surprise, I expected a gruff guy. He was very cordial, and we worked out a deal, a contract, in about 10 minutes. He talked to me, and what do we need? And we worked the deal out, and we shook hands. And that was the best negotiations I ever had. I mean, it was the easiest. And I expected this guy to be a gruff guy because he was very successful in business. And no doubt about it, he ruled with an iron fist in those days. But that was my first encounter with Arthur.
I'll tell you one thing, though. You didn't have to write it down. If he gave you his word, you could take it to the bank.
Well, Rocky,
That's true.
He was intimidating even to you, wasn't he?
You know, Dad was intimidating, but my grandfather, I think, was the most intimidating man I've ever met. And it helped me a great deal because you can be afraid of a lot of things, but he taught me not to be intimidated. And because you could deal with Arthur, you could deal with anyone. And he had this deep baritone voice to go with what Tony said, with his size and his presence. And I was talking to Bob Verdi before we came in. If he walked in this room and sat in the back, you felt his presence. It was an uncanny thing. He just had a way about him that you knew exactly where he was. And I saw him go to a cocktail party at someone's house, and he went into the office and sat behind the desk because he felt more comfortable behind a desk than he was in front talking to people at the cocktail party.
Well, in the book, I do go into Arthur at some length, and his nickname was Baron of the Bottom Line, if that gives you any indication of how tough he was. And yeah, Rocky told me one of the great lines in the book is like, you think my father was tough, and he was. He was a pussycat compared to Arthur. And I think I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think it was hugely important in the formation of Rocky and who the leader Rocky became, because Arthur recognized that Rocky was willing to stand up to him, and when just about no one else was, and he saw that Rocky was willing to stand up to his father, and again, people were wary to do that. But and one of the funny stories in the book, talk about big man, bear of a man. You go into the office, he must have loved you, because if it was a businessman he was trying to negotiate hard with, Rocky described this whole ritual where you'd come into the office, big table, air conditioner down to about 50, blowing on you, and he would make you sit. Like, I got to make a couple of calls. I'll be with you in a second. 5 calls, 10 calls. You're still sitting there, freezing by now, and he's a little above you, and you're down here. And he had a thing he would do with a pencil, right? He
put it in his mouth, and the point would be pointing right at you, like he's shooting a gun at you.
And he wouldn't say anything, just
No.
pencil pointing at you, looking at you. And what was it? There's a couple of other the psychological things that were just really. Oh, his glasses. He had 2 pair of glasses. He would take one off, put it down, pick the other one, put it up. Okay, now where were we? You know,
So
he was great.
The few phone calls would last about 6 hours. and then what he would do is we had different financial statements, and one company was doing very poorly. He had it on the front of the desk facing him, and you're looking at this statement, and he never brought it up. He wanted to tell you he was really peeved at you, but he never brought it up, and you just sat there perspiring, saying, when's he going to bring it up? When's he going to talk about it? But he was a master of mind games before they were in vogue.
And with Rocky, had one of those reports on the table, and so Arthur makes, I don't know, what is it, 20 calls while Rocky's waiting, and he said, excuse me, I got to go to the bathroom. And Arthur steps out, and Rocky's sitting there, and 40 minutes later says to Gertrude, the formidable secretary, is he coming back? And she said, what, he went to dinner.
He wanted to tell me how PO'd he was. He just went for dinner, and she said, he'll be back about 8 o'clock tonight. You can wait for him, or he'll see you in the morning. I said, well, with all due respect, I'll see him in the morning, because our son Danny was younger at the time, and I said, that's fine. And he never brought up what he wanted to see me about. And that's when I realized he was sending me a message without ever saying a word.
Brian, I'm guessing you taped hours and hours. It's a long process. And I'm wondering, along the way, were you ever surprised pleasantly about Rocky's candor and the details and the stories? I mean, because you can tape someone for hours and barely fill a page of a notebook, but there's so much good stuff in this book.
Oh, for sure. I mean, yeah, you can interview someone, they'll filibuster you for a good hour. But you know, I can't say I was really surprised that Rocky was candid, just because when I did the original magazine piece, he really opened up, but to a point. And he opened up about, you know, doing things differently than his father, and sort of discussed that in depth. For the book, though, he really started to get into the family dynamic and some of the harsh realities of that. And I'm a journalist who is, you know, paid to coax out these kinds of stories, and even I was wincing a little bit because they were really tough, like interactions between Bill and Rocky and some of the siblings. So in that regard, I was surprised. But I tell you, you said, was there anything positive that I was surprised about? And I don't know if it's positive, but one thing that really did surprise me was, you know, I know, like you guys, I'm just a fan watching this phenomenon building. And one is, you know, it always just shocked me that no owner's a rock star. Like, yeah, I mean, there's some prominent owners, Mark Cuban or whatever, but none is like beloved in the way that Rocky was. And part of that, I know, was someone explained it to me, that, you know, our team had kind of been, in a way, taken away, you know, that magic, that wonder. And so for someone to bring that back and give that gift back, I mean, no wonder there's gratitude. But on the surface, it looked so easy. You know, of course you do that. Of course you put the games back on TV. Of course you know, do this and look like all the right, perfect steps. But talking to McDonough, And in Rocky, and I hadn't realized this, it's like we were flying by the seat of our pants way more than kind of we let on. I mean, some of these decisions you didn't know, you know, if it was the right thing. And it happened to, everything, of course, happened to click into place. So that was surprising to me, that all along the way, there was, you know, I don't know, cautious optimism, but it was never a done deal, you know.
And Brian, maybe you'd tell the crowd about how many different people you interviewed and kind of get a perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, that was the other thing about Rocky's participation. I mean, I lost count of how many people I interviewed, but few of them would have talked to me probably if Rocky hadn't told them. And he didn't just say, you know, yeah, take the guy's call. He said, tell him the story. Cousin Bruce.
And especially some of the high school friends, which we will not.
High school friends.
Yeah, I said, tell them some stories, but don't tell them all the stories.
There was one story about, I think it involved, see, Rocky was kind of the leader of the group with his station wagon, and they'd all pile in the station wagon and go marauding. And one of his friends told me, there's a story involving the station wagon and a golf course and midnight. And that's as far as I can go to tell you. And I asked Rocky about it. He said,
yeah. The country club will no longer allow station wagons on the ground
that's
anymore.
Right. Subarus, yes. Station wagon, no. But, you know, yeah, they're very, very candid. And I think one of the things, one of the questions we thought about was who was a particularly interesting person to talk to. And there were so many. But Rocky's Aunt Betty, who is Bill's sister, lives in Springfield, and very elegant, you know, proper, smart lady, met me for lunch down at the big restaurant where all the politicos gather. And she gave me before we sit down, she gave me a tie in a box. Like, it's just such a sweet gesture. But then, and, you know, I wasn't sure how open she wanted to be, and as she started to warm up, you know, she started to cut loose a little bit, and it was some of the really important pieces of the story and the hard parts of the story.
Well, and she would talk about, and it was really kind of sad because they had housekeepers and nannies, and when she would see my grandfather, her dad, but she'd have to go to these different buildings, if it's old Chicago Stadium, Detroit, or Madison Square Garden, to really interact with her dad because he was always working. But she, you know, loved the time with him, and it was, you know, very poignant that how she would kind of reminisce about her interaction with her father and how much she loved him, but, you know, that he was always working and always trying to, you know, better himself and better the family.
Tony, as a former player and a great player with the Blackhawks, then you're an executive with other teams. You saw the Blackhawks at their peak, and then you saw them slide. Can you put into perspective what Rocky's reign has meant to the Blackhawks? The fact that he took over, hired great people like John McDonough and Jay Blunk, and then brought you guys back as ambassadors. I mean, almost categorically resurrected the franchise.
Well, I mean, let's be realistic. The last few years under Bill, we were in a spiral. And, you know, unfortunately, it took Bill's death to resurrect the team, because Rocky came in with fresh blood and he resurrected it and made it all come together. He got some good people, like you said. He spent a lot of his own money and resurrected it and brought it back. It was a lot of hard work, believe me. And these guys, they brought the team back, and then they brought us old guys back, very old guys, I guess, to just improved the image of the overall thing. And the thing I noticed with him, with the players, nobody in pro sports get treated as well as the Blackhawks. Believe me, on the travel and everything. And they're just, everything is first class. But again, we expect, you know, as you expect, we want to win all the time. But unfortunately now with Rocky's situation, we got the salary cap issue. And, you know, we lose a lot of players, and that's why we sort of we were in the last couple of years on a downhill slope, and hopefully we can resurrect now and start going back up again, because nobody in pro sports is consistently a winner. It's impossible to do. You can do it for times, and then you have your lull and you go backwards. So now we're sort of in the valley, and we want to resurrect back up again and make it all happen all over again. So Rocky has been a tremendous force. I'm not trying to, shall we say, glorify him or whatever the case may be. He just did it, and he did it his way. And he brought the good people along, like McDonough and Blanc and these people, that to lead the team, because he gives you a job to do, and he lets you do it. And I think that's the way ownership should be. Don't meddle in everything. So that's what he does.
Well, Tony, we were around when I don't want to speak too much for the players, but I always felt that back in the day, maybe the players liked the fans, and the fans liked the players, and everybody liked each other, but there was always a little distance with the front office. And now there's a connection between management, ownership, and labor that I don't ever remember existing here before.
No, I think that in the old days, you know, there was a big line between management and players, that the players really didn't like management. It's that simple. And the way that it works now, it's a bond. Everybody's working together. The minute you were done playing in the old days, you were out the door. And now they incorporate all the, like the veterans, like Sharp and these guys. They get them involved, and they're not like thrown to the wayside. And I think that's good, because you guys have a relationship with some of the players that have played, and I think that's very important for the future generations, because these guys know that if they work hard, you'll be rewarded down the line, even not as a player, but other ways. And they bring back, like this convention, they bring back everybody and spare no expense, and everybody has a great time,
You know,
including fans.
You know, Tony, I think when you talk about the old days, I think what happened is so many of these owners were so jealous that the players were bigger than they were, and those owners' ego was bigger than this hotel. And you forget that the players are the ones that bring people into the stadiums, not ownership. And I think that what you see today is ownership, if they can check their egos at the door, have a much better organization than the old days.
There was a big resentment back in the day. The last few years I played, we used to have to chip in the players to get the shampoo and stuff like that for after the game, and the sodas, the pops, and the waters, and all that stuff. So management wasn't at its best in those days, and
Did you have to steal it from the hotels when you were there and bring it home?
Not the hotels you stayed at. There wasn't much shampoo.
You never shared any with Verdi, did you?
Give you shampoo.
Rocky, you said a lot of profound things. One I'm paraphrasing. You said you can't save your way to a better product. Is that?
You can't save your way to prosperity.
All right. Yeah. In other words, can't cut. You spend money to make money, and the team is reflective of that. And the other thing, you've done so much in terms of connection to the fans. I mean, you sit right among them, and it's impressive to me. I mean, most owners, they distance themselves somewhat from the masses, but you're right there. I mean, I've never seen you say no to an autograph, and there are not any owners who are asked to sign autographs.
Unless it's a check. But it's like going to a restaurant. You want to know who the owner of that restaurant is, and the last thing you want them to see is in their office. They should be with their patrons. And I think that anyone that comes to United Center spent a lot of money to come there. So why should you not give them the time and the courtesy to talk to them if they want to? And it's nice when people do want to talk to you. And it kind of reminds you of the angry dog. If the dog looks angry, you're not going to go over and pet it. But that dog is friendly and the tail's wagging, of course you're going to go. And hopefully, obviously John McDonough sets a standard, and Jay Blunk and the rest of the organization, everyone's approachable, because all we have is relationships. You have relationships with your fans, which are your customers, relationship with the players, which earn all our paychecks, relationship with everyone in the office. So if everyone gets along, then no one has any grudges against anyone else.
If I can add something to Rocky sitting amongst the fans, I remember hearing that when I first started writing the magazine story. And I think a couple of people were like, is this sincere, okay, or is it a thing, He always sits on the fans. But I watched several games with Rocky, and he sits in his usual place on the concourse. And I think, was it the knee replacement, or there was it was difficult for Rocky to stand up a little bit because of the knee, and I would watch, I don't know, 30 more, maybe 40 people during the course of the game come, and Rocky got up every time, to his feet, took selfies, autographs, and people, people feel that, and it was clearly sincere, not to gush, but it was really, it was touching, to see.
Rocky, when you took over, you were asked in many forms, why did you act so quickly? And I think your answer was, you couldn't afford to wait. Is that accurate?
I mean, we had, the Hawks were hemorrhaging money. You didn't have time to hire a consultant because they probably would charge you for what you already know. And you had to just roll up your sleeves and go to work. And then you wanted to find the best people possible, and we were fortunate enough to convince John McDonough to come over from the Chicago Cubs. And it's probably the best-selling job I ever did. So coming from the Cubs, which are still, up here, America's, team, to come at that time to the Hawks in '07, it took a hell of a selling job. But I knew what a great businessman John was. I was always a White Sox fan, but I admired the job he had done at the Sox. I lived up in Winnetka, and I couldn't find a Sox fan if I gave him $1,000. What John had done and how he had transformed Wrigley Field in the area to Wrigleyville, and interacted, even though they hadn't done well on the field. They led the attendance record, for Major League Baseball, And I said, if we're ever fortunate enough to have a world-class individual like that come over to the Hawks, let him do his job and then get the hell out of the way so he can do it. And we are fortunate enough, and I think the record speaks for itself for those 3 Stanley Cups.
So I recount that Sell job in the book, and it really is it's a funny story. I mean, John, I think John's out there, didn't know what Rocky looked like when he came to meet him at Champ's restaurant for that first time. And he said he was sitting there and like he's looking around, and he saw a guy come in a suit. He's like, well, I guess that's probably my man right there. And just the really, I mean, that was John's dream job, and you know, the agony sort of he went through to come to the decision. But it was Rocky who made that happen, who made him see the potential. And as far as hemorrhaging money, how much that first year was?
$30 million cash.
$30 million in cash. That was the other surprising thing when I came in. I mean, I'd written about it, but I had no idea where things had gotten to. And you talk about why so fast. I mean, it was far more dire than anybody knew. And I think those are the kinds of, not to sell the book, but those are the kinds of insights, you know, that I learned that you may find interesting.
Well, I want to say John was on the job 48 hours maybe, and he realized that he had taken over the hockey version of the Titanic, and
With no bottom in sight.
Right.
but still
Extra icebergs.
He had the presence. He called me and said, "Do you have a number for Tony Esposito, and do you have a number for Stan Mikita?" I knew John from baseball, and on top of all the 900 other things he had to fix, one of them was the broken relationships with guys like Tony and Stan. Stan said he never felt welcome in the building. Tony, you pretty well much the same, I guess, and Bobby. Mm-hmm. And this was a master stroke, and by John, one of many. I know you felt detached, right? Completely.
Naturally, you know, you come in the building and, you know, the manager, there was no secret. It was Pulford. I mean, he was a different kind of guy.
Well, anyone that makes you buy your own shampoo, it speaks for itself.
He was different, boy. And he just didn't want anything to do with it. Anybody. He probably, the best word I could describe him is he didn't like anybody. That's probably it.
That's more than one word.
Well, I couldn't get it in one word.
We're on a 7-second delay, so.
You know, it's funny, John McDonough told me a good story about Mike Gatsby, the trainer, and so it's one of John's first days on the job. He's sitting at his desk, and Gapper comes up with an invoice. And he said, John looked at it, he said, "This is an invoice for tape." He said, "Yes, Mr. Pulford approves every invoice, even if it's for 10 rolls of tape." And John said, "Well, that's a new day, Gapper. You can approve your own invoices for tape from now on."
Well, when Rocky was describing walking into the offices the first time after he took over the team, and first of all, it was deadly quiet in the office. It's like no one was talking to each other and not really doing much. And Rocky was like, what's going on here? And there was a phone ringing, and I forgot who you asked, but DiMaria, wasn't it?
Yeah, with the switchboard, the phone's ringing, there's no one manning the switchboard.
There's no one manning the switchboard, and I think the executive Rocky talked to said, "That's okay. Usually we hire an intern to hire, but she's sick, or she had to go off with her boyfriend, so So I'll answer it. And Rocky said, that's okay. I got it. And then the other phone, the phone that rang to sales, right?
To the box office.
To the box office. I mean, this is a time when 6,000 people are coming to the UC for the games. It wouldn't go through to the box office. People call up and say, I want tickets, and they'd be pushed through, and no one picked up in the box office, you know. And Rocky was just like, oh boy.
Well, you know, it's hard to fall out of the first floor window, so I had nowhere to go but up.
I think one of the most impressive things about what Rocky did, he basically did everything that wasn't done before, but with utmost respect for your dad, Bill. And I think when you were asked, well, Rocky, what would your dad have thought putting home games on TV? Something like that. And you said, I think he would have respected the fact that I was trying to enhance the value of the franchise or something like that. It was always, I mean, you basically did everything different than it was done before, and yet you did it taking the high road.
Well, thank you, Bob. I mean, Dad would be very, very pleased when you look at the franchise today where it was in '07. He just wouldn't agree with one thing we would have done.
Right. How would he felt about putting the games on TV? I think you said he would have hated it.
He said over his dead body, and he really meant it.
We got a question here for Rocky from Carl in Rockford. We love the new atrium and MB Ice Arena. What is your next project?
Book.
Well, we had the MB Arena, and we're going to have a book signing there also one of these days. But I think we're going to find at the atrium at the United Center, we have the Laver Cup as a world-class tennis event coming the 21st of September. But we'll have a new restaurant opening up on the Blackhawks and Bulls on the second floor, and you'll see it coming out, and so you can have seating, you know, out looking over the atrium and then and before, and we're going to call it Queenie, and it's really in honor of my grandmother because my grandfather's nickname for my grandmother Virginia was always Queenie, and so talking to Jerry Reinsdorf and they said, well, Jerry said, I want to call it Rockies. I said, that's not going to happen. I said, this is not a self-serving document or a restaurant. But we came up with the idea of Queenie's kind of to memorialize and respect the past, and we can have some pictures because she would entertain. She was a #1 hockey fan. My grandfather would be back in the office counting, you know, the house and the tickets, and she'd be out there as a fan and always sat in that seat. But so it's going to be, I think, an exciting thing, and hopefully it's going to kind of resemble a high-end supper club from Wisconsin. So you know you're going to have cheese curds, and you know you're going to have a relish tray on every table. So hopefully it'd be fun for all ages.
By the way, picture Queen, the most proper lady you can imagine. Out at the farm, she set the table, you know, full settings, 5 forks and all that. And she wore these big hats to the game, right? You know, bonnets. But she would sit right behind the Blackhawks bench, right? Those were her seats, and she had a ticket, was it, made into a golden replica, or her season ticket for her seat. And the players and the fans around her are drunk and beer and cursing and blah, 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 and she's right in the middle of it with a bonnet, you know. It was just wonderful.
Yeah, she wouldn't be happy today because now we're, you know, paperless, so she wouldn't know what to do.
Rocky, you've been quoted widely as questioning the amusement tax that's on the books here for the. Can you explain that and the impact it will have on fans?
I'm not so sure I'm really welcome at City Hall, but you know, everyone that comes to the United Center, it's 12%. It's 9% for the city and 3% for the county, and then the city just raised the amusement tax for concerts to 10.5%. So, you know, I've told City Hall I think it's something that it's a fan tax. Most people don't realize it's 12% off the top. Unfortunately, you fans are stuck with it. But concerts, those promoters aren't looking at dollars, they're looking at pennies. And they very well can go to Rosemont, they very well can go to Tinley Park, they very well can go up to the new building in Milwaukee, they can go outside music venues in Wisconsin, and it's going to have its effect. And selfishly, we built, Jerry Reinsdorf and my father built the United Center with their own money, and you get taxed. It's like death by 1,000 cuts. All the traffic monitors you see around the United Center, we get a bill from the city. All the security that we have, the United Center has to pay. And I said, I don't mind paying taxes, but what do you get for it? And you get that blank stare because you get nothing in return.
Well, what you and your dad and Jerry have Reinsdorf, I mean, that whole neighborhood is like rejuvenated. I mean, the rink, the practice rink is, I hesitate to call it a practice rink. It's so much more than that.
Well, and they have the summer league and folks were telling me last night they're having 1,000 people there on a Wednesday night to come and watch, these players play in the summer league on 4-on-4, and it's really something. And now, we talk about the United Center, but it's truly a campus. And what it's done to have urban renewal in the last 25 years. I mean, 25 years ago, you'd never see anyone walking down Damon or Madison Street unless they wanted to get shot.
And talk about state-of-the-art facilities for players. I mean, that practice facility is spectacular, but Rocky gave me a tour of the players' facilities with weight rooms and all that, and then I looked at the jacuzzi, and it's like the size of, half an Olympic pool. I was like, that's a jacuzzi, and it's like 10 feet, It's amazing how well the players are taken care of.
I remember in the 70s when you come to a game, it was scary around there, believe me. And when you parked outside of, like where the security is, you parked, say, across the street, and some young guy would come up to you and say, I'll watch your car if you give me $5. And usually you gave him the money because otherwise he would kick a fender in or something. So it was really scary around that area. And they bought all the land up and they made it, cleared it all out. And now it's amazing now. This whole community is coming back.
I'm guessing when you walk around the locker room now and see the surroundings and the chef over there in the corner and all the nice, carpeting and all that, you probably don't recognize. I remember what it was like when you guys were.
Yeah, we had a little wee room with stalls, tile floor, and the washroom area, and that was it. And no sodas or anything. We had to buy our own.
That's right. No.
And I'll tell you, right now, it's so beautiful in there. It's like, I'd like to stay overnight sometime in there. Pool tables, TVs, everything. It's beautiful.
Well, didn't you used to have to walk up the stairs with your skates on?
Oh yeah, we were in the basement at Chicago Stadium. We had to go up 12 stairs to get to the ice.
With skates on?
Yeah, and all your equipment on. And I remember one time I had a hamstring pull, but I was playing, but I couldn't go up the stairs because I couldn't bend the legs like that. So I had to have two security guys help me up the stairs. And once I got on the ice, I was okay. But the stair walking was really difficult. But some guys have said that shortened my career. They said it shortened our careers by about 2 years because we couldn't make the stairs anymore.
We've got to wind up here shortly. Brian and Rocky, if you have any final words, I know you're We're proud of the book. You should be. Any final thoughts on why I should go buy a book tomorrow?
Make a great Christmas gift.
I will buy a book, or don't want to get fired.
Well, number one, the foundation. You know that it helps the foundation. But two, it's a really good question, and I'm glad you asked, because what I wanted the book to do is not be a sports book, but really to tell a deeper story with lots of interesting, tidbits and scenes and stuff along the way, but that really captured the feeling of fans and us fans, and sort of the roller coaster ride that we were taken on. The team was great for so long, and then down, and then back up. But then to give an insight into what it really took, including navigating these very challenging family relationships. So I think it's got a lot in there, and I think you'll enjoy it, and it does benefit the foundation. So.
Bob, I want to thank you for hosting this panel, but I want first to thank Tony for writing the forward to the book as far as the players and what it looked like.
But let me tell you, Bob Verdi helped me with the forward. He had to put it in the writing, and we talked several times and worked on it.
That's the most Tony has ever talked to me in 35 years. He never talked to me before.
But Tony was very, very nice to do that, because I said, at the beginning that there's 3 generations. You've seen them all. You've seen 4 generations. So I appreciate Tony, and I appreciate Brian convincing me why we should do this, why you should open up, and telling a family story. And I think in years to come that people want to say, well, how'd you get there? Tell me about your past, what's going on, and we can go back and reflect on this story, because it's an interesting story. It's one that still today I still find interesting, and I think other people will too. So thank you for your attentiveness, and thank you for coming today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.